12. Please hurry. There's a lot of dead bodies. Please.
This morning, growing fallout from the new Justice Department report that outlines, quote, cascading failures by police who responded to the Uvalde school massacre in 2022. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed.
Had law enforcement agencies followed generally accepted practices in an active shooter situation, lives would have been saved and people would have survived.
Yesterday morning, the U.S. Department of Justice released the findings of their analysis of the failed response to the shooting that took place at Robb Elementary School in Texas back in May of 2022. And it's damning, not particularly surprising. I think that we all remember just the lack of response immediately, the horrific attempts to cover it up and put the blame on other people in the immediate aftermath of it. One of the most shameful instances in American political history. And we want to just summarize some of what they found. They interviewed hundreds of people, they analyzed thousands of documents. And as you saw there with Merrick Garland, they focused on the failure to recognize an active shooter situation, failure to take courageous action, failure to secure the crime scene, failure to establish standard operating procedures, and failure to communicate with the families. There were failures of all sorts. Failures to go in despite literally hundreds of police officers armed for battle, all the way down to telling families that their kids were still alive when they weren't, which is just, as I have a 5-month-old daughter now, I don't know what I would do if you had given me that false hope when you knew otherwise. I don't know what I would do if you waited for hours while someone massacred kids inside of a school. It wouldn't be good for any of the people nearby. But in any event, like I said, very little of this is surprising because the failures were so obvious in the moment, and the lack of action afterward, equally obvious. What has been done to stop this from happening? What has been done to stop our police officers from being manned by either the officers or at least the leadership that are perfectly content to just set a perimeter while kids are gunned down? I don't know. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I have very mixed feelings on this report, actually. I respect the hard work that went into it. It's important, it should be read. But, and I think it's great that it conclusively proves the lie of the Republican trope that it takes a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun, when you have 276 good guys with guns who can't stop one 18-year-old with a machine designed to kill lots of people really fast. But what gets me down about the report is it follows this tradition we have with gun violence in this country. To me, the problem isn't 276 cops afraid of an 18-year-old who easily purchased an AR-15. The real problem is an 18-year-old who illegally purchased an AR-15. I don't care that the cops were terrified. The cops had good reason to be terrified because civilians should not own machines designed to kill lots of people really fast. We don't let civilians own tactical nukes. We don't let civilians own white phosphorus. We do accept some limitations on our Second Amendment rights, but this is how we do it with mass murders here. I mentioned earlier, Nikki Haley, when we saw the horrific church shooting in South Carolina, suddenly it became all about a flag. Las Vegas, the worst mass shooting of white people in history. They called it the worst mass murder in history, but it was only of Caucasians. That whole thing became about bump stocks, not about AR-15s. And it seems consistently when these horrific, atrocious crimes happen, the culture finds a way to make the narrative about lazy cops, not about that emotionally unstable 21-year-olds should not have easy access to machines designed to kill lots of humans really fast. And I'm deeply frustrated with the report because I find it's the same pattern happening again. It's fun to beat up on coward cops. This is about a bigger problem than that.
Totally agree. Just that clip at the beginning just kind of like knocked the wind out of me. No 12-year-old should ever have to experience that. No child should ever have to feel that way. And it, of course, we're the only country where this happens this often at this scale. And also the same country that throws up their hands and says, well, it's just the way it is. We can't do anything about it. Yeah. And it's the power of the NRA, it's the power of the gun lobby and the manufacturers and politicians who will turn a blind eye to this stuff or just let people die because they want to continue receiving those campaign contribution checks. It's not a divisive issue. You look at not just families in Uvalde, you look at families all over the country who unfortunately have had their loved ones fall victim to gun violence. And they say the same thing again and again and again. Sandy Hook parents tried. They shouldn't have had to be in that situation, but they tried for reform, and Republicans killed it. And I don't know what the avenue forward is when you have a system that is so corrupt and so prone to corporate malfeasance that this is the result. A 12-year-old crying in a closet, hoping that she sees the end of the day.
And that day, everyone should subscribe to NRA mailings, because that day they sent out the mailing that Joe Biden's gonna come take your guns. People believe it, and they go out and buy more guns. And the NRA, which is not a gun rights organization, which is not a gun safety organization, they are the lobbying wing for the gun manufacturers, made a massive profit. They make a killing on every mass killing. It works. It's a great business model for them. But there is something that can happen. You know, if executions were televised, we'd ban executions. If slaughterhouses had glass doors, we'd all be vegetarian. If they released the video of Uvalde with the audio of the children's screams, they only released it with the gunshots and they edited out the sounds of the children screaming. Why? Is it acceptable to us? What are we trying to protect people from? I want to see parents in these mass murders, because there will be more, because a lot of money is spent to guarantee there will be more, because the mass murders generate profit. Yeah. But I want to see one of these parents go Emmett Till's mom and release the photos. When Americans understand visually what an AR-15 round does to a child's body, then, and I'm afraid only then, we'll see movement on this, but not until there's images.
Yeah, we can't sanitize the reality.
We do.
I know, but I'm with you, we shouldn't. And the one thing I do want to say though about the cops is these parents, they're calling for two things. They're calling for reform to our gun laws, which I think we're all in agreement with. And they want the cops who are getting either pay raises, or even despite having been put on suspension or administrative leave, they're still making 6 figures a year in a town of 20-some thousand people who are with a median income of around $45,000. Yeah. These people are getting paid if they are on administrative leave to not work, but if they are still working, there are reports now that they're harassing these parents who are calling for accountability. So like, I hear you, we shouldn't just frame it on lazy cops. It's also, they're operating as a gang, and because they have like a union infrastructure to block any outside scrutiny, they fought this report.
Exactly.
They're harassing these parents who are calling for accountability. Could you imagine that? You lose a child, or your daughter or son loses a classmate, and then the cops that stood by in the parking lot, then they harass you, pull you over repeatedly and tell you to leave town. This is demented.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up great points. It's a combination of all of these things. It's the cops in this instance. It's the both cowardly and horrifically cruel politicians, 99% of whom self-identify as committed Christians who don't give a damn if kids are massacred. They just don't. Like, you know, the sorts of things that theoretically would inspire change in a country that wasn't a failed state can't hear it. Like Sandy Hook doesn't matter, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas doesn't matter, Uvalde doesn't matter. Like if you were to try to hypothesize what is horrific enough that it can get through the impasse, you might come up with things like this, but it's not enough.
Yeah, no. Black president.
Mandalay Bay is not enough, and Thousand Oaks isn't enough. Tan suit and a black president.
Tan suit and a black president.
Yeah, yeah. They're more frustrated by that. Yeah, it is incredibly frustrating. I think it's a failure at every level. We are a broken culture, a broken society, and you pointed out, you know, that a lot of people don't support this. It's totally true. Unfortunately, one part of us being a failed state is that it doesn't matter what the people think. It has no effect whatsoever on anything. But the fact that we can't get any laws changed, and it doesn't matter. People in Texas aren't turning against the GOP because the GOP is perfectly happy to sacrifice their kids on an altar of blood at the foot of Donald Trump. They don't care. Ted Cruz isn't in danger because they're perfectly happy to see your kids die, any more than Ted Cruz would be in danger because they're perfectly happy to see your grandma freeze to death in a Texas winter. They can kill you and nobody cares. The hundreds of thousands of needless dead in COVID, nobody seems to be persuaded by the fact that they're perfectly happy to see you and your family die. And we say this over and over and over again on podcasts and on shows, and nothing changes. It is so utterly frustrating.